Well, welcome back. We've got a nice quick video on completing the square. So take good notes and we'll be looking for a problem or two in your notebook tomorrow. Alright, so let's run through the steps on completing the square. Step number 1. The coefficient of the highest power has to be a 1. Alright, so we want these steps written out nicely in your notebook, and I'll try to underline the important details. If not, divide each term by that value to create a leading coefficient of 1. And let's go ahead and write this example down next to it. So I have x squared plus 8x minus 4 equals 0. Notice my greatest coefficient is a 1. Step 2. Move the constant term to the right-hand side. So you can clearly see that I have added 4 to both sides. Step 3. Prepare to add the needed value to create the perfect square trinomial. Be sure to balance the equation. That means to do it to each side. And they say boxes may help you if you want to put a box there. We're going to add something to each side. Step 4. To find the needed value for the perfect square trinomial, here's the rule. Take half the coefficient of the middle term, square it, add that value to both sides. So let me write out. We're taking that b, remember we're dividing it by 2, and we're squaring it. So in this case, I'm taking 8, dividing it by 2, and squaring it. 8 divided by 2 is 4, squared gets me 16. So notice that's what they put in those boxes. They added 16 to both sides. Factor the perfect square trinomial. This should always be a quantity times itself. So when you factor, it should always be x plus the same amount or x minus the same amount. In this case, it's x plus 4 and x plus 4. And we'll write that as x plus 4 squared. On this side, 16 plus 4 should get me 20. Now, just take the square root of each side. So square root, square root. That kills the square and the square root, so I get x plus 4. Notice that plus or minus radical 20. That's a big deal. Okay, I'm going to subtract my 4 over, so I get x equals negative 4 plus or minus radical 20. And then I broke down radical 20, and I've got my two answers. So hopefully you could follow that step by step as a good review, and we'll do a few practice problems together. Solve x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. We're going to do it by completing the square. Alright, so that first term is the important guy. Is your leading coefficient a 1 of your highest power? Yes. So step 2 says move your constant to the other side. So I've got x squared plus 6x, and I'm going to say equals negative 1. And I'm going to go ahead and put those boxes in. Maybe that's helpful, because we are going to add something to this side and to this side. Okay, I'll put my plus signs there. We're adding something to each side. Alright, so the rule is b over 2 squared. Take your middle term, your b value, cut it in half, and square it. Remember, insides first. 6 divided by 2 is 3 squared, so I should get 9. I should always get a positive number because I'm squaring it. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. Okay, now this side should factor very nicely. So this should be x of the same quantity times itself. And am, add multiply, x plus 3 and x plus 3 equals 8. Therefore, because this is 2 of the same thing, I can really say it's the quantity x plus 3 squared equals 8. I'm now going to take the square root of both sides, and don't forget your plus minus. So those cancel, and I get x plus 3 equals plus or minus radical 8. And then I'm going to subtract this 3 over, so I get x equals. Notice that I keep it on the left-hand side of the plus minus. I cannot combine those together. They are not like terms. Now my final step is to say, can this term be broken down? And I think it can. I get x equals negative 3 plus minus. I do it off to the side. I say 8 is really radical 4 and radical 2. Okay, notice they're both under the radical. And now I say, okay, I know that answer. 2 radical 2. And notice I keep the things that belong on the same side together. This should always be on the right-hand side of the plus minus. This should always be on the left-hand side. And then clearly we just want to justify that there are two answers. There really is negative 3 plus 2 radical 2. And there is negative 3 minus 2 radical 2. And there you have it. We have got our solutions. All right, example 2. All right, now notice this one changes. That first term, remember, our leading coefficient of our biggest term has to be a 1. Is this bear a 1? No, clearly it's a 2. So the rule said in your notes to divide every term by that number. So I'm going to divide everybody. Remember, in math, you have to be equal and balanced. Divide everybody by 2. So I've got p squared plus 10 equals 3p. Now, look at the other thing they're trying to mess with you. Is everybody on the right side? Remember, the constant goes on this side, not the p term. So I'm going to go back and set my equation equal to 0. P squared minus 3p plus 10 equals 0. All right, now my leading coefficient is a 1, and we're in good shape. So we'll move that constant over. So I've got p squared minus 3p equals negative 10. Okay, moving that constant over. All right, we're going to leave a little space to add on to, so I'm going to put plus a little box. I'm going to add something to both sides. We're always adding. Okay, and the rule says take your b over 2 and square it. Take your middle term, divide it by 2 and square it. So that's negative 3 divided by 2 squared. Squaring fractions is easy, top and bottom. Positive 9 over 4. Remember, we're squaring, we should always get a positive number. So I'm going to add 9/4 to both sides. Now notice, you don't always get pretty numbers. It's nice if it works out that way, but it doesn't always happen. So that means this side should factor very nicely, believe it or not. You are adding to this term and multiplying to this term. Now here's the trick, guys. If you can't figure out what it is, it's always the number you squared. Works every time. It's always the number you squared. So I'm going to say my factors are x minus 3/2 and x minus 3/2. Let me say that again. It's always the number you squared with the sign. So x minus 3/2 and x minus 3/2. If you don't believe me, FOIL it out. X squared minus 3/2 minus 3/2 gets me negative 6/2, which is negative 3. And last times last, it's going to be a positive 9/4, which is what we're looking for. On this side, I can use my calculator if you can't do that in your head. I'm going to get negative 31/4. So now I can say this is the quantity x minus 3/2 squared, because there's two of them that are the same, equals negative 31 over 4. Take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus minus. So I've got x minus 3/2 equals plus or minus radical 31 over 4. And I'm going to add my 3/2 over, so x equals 3/2. Notice I'm keeping it on the left-hand side of the plus minus. Now, again, we just have to say, can we break this down? And I think we can just a little bit. Remember, when you take the square root of a fraction, you're doing it to the top and to the bottom. So watch how I rewrite this. The square root of 31 over the square root of 4. Top and bottom get their own separate one. Now, do you know one of those? Well, I would say so. Whoops, I lost my negative sign. I apologize. Keep the negative in there. I know the square root of 4 is the number 2. And I know this negative in there can come out as an I. So I'm going to say my final answer is 3/2 plus or minus I radical 31 over 2. So again, the negative came out as the I. I knew the square root of 4 was 2, and I don't know the square root of 31. And there you go. A little nastier than the first one, but still doable. All right, let me walk you through one more one together. Feel free to pause it, see if you can do it on your own. I just want to stress that is that leading coefficient a 1? I would say no, so let's make sure we divide every term by a negative 1. So I get x squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0. So why don't you pause it, give it a whirl, see what you got, and compare when you need to. So you can see I moved my 5 over. I left room, so I was adding something to both sides. I've got my b over 2 squared here, and I got a 1, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So this is going to factor, again, it's the term you squared, x plus 1 and x plus 1 equals negative 4. I can say this is x plus 1 squared equals negative 4. Just going to take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus minus. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus negative 4. And then I'm going to subtract my 1, keep it on the left-hand side of the plus minus, and we're almost done. Lastly, I'll just say to myself, do I know if I can simplify this? Well, clearly an I is going to come out because there's a negative under there. And do you know the square root of 4? I would say so. I get 2i. And again, just make sure the corresponding parts stay under their right plus or minus side. So I could say negative 1 plus 2i and negative 1 minus 2i for my two answers. All right. Well, it's that time, and we'll be looking for this problem to be completed in your notebook tomorrow. Have a great night, take your time, and we'll see you then.